the weekly show with David J. Maloney. This week, David chats with legendary guitarist Andy Timmons. And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to the weekly show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. On tonight's show, we've got a really special guest. His musical exploits are legendary, and he's considered by many to be one of the greatest guitarists of his generation. Bursting onto the scene with Danger Danger, he went on to have a stellar solo career, and he's shown no signs of slowing down. Here after the break to chat about his life, career, and the unbelievable Beatles story behind his brand new single, I'm in Love, is none other than guitarist Andy Timmons. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Our featured guest tonight has burst onto the national stage with the band Danger Danger, and from that moment on has been considered by both his fans and peers as one of the greatest guitar talents of his era. From session work to successful solo projects, he has done it all, and there are no signs of him slowing down. Here to chat about his life, career, and the unbelievable story behind his brand new single, I'm in Love, is none other than guitarist Andy Timmons. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Great to be with you. And boy, I got a lot to live up to after that introduction, man.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, you've had one of those long, varied, and accomplished careers that, I mean, so many musicians and artists would die for. So
Yeah.
I'd kind of like to ask, where did your love of music first start?
I was just in a musical household. My mother and father there was a family, Motorola console stereo with a, smattering of 50s and 60s records. A lot of the, popular culture stuff, either from folk music or Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. Everybody had that Whipped Cream and Other Delights record. But I had three older brothers. And I'm the youngest. So I was born in 1963. And my oldest brother would have been 12 years old when I came into the family. And so he started buying all the British Invasion stuff from 1963 forward. So all the Beatles, all the Dave Clark Five, Kinks, Animals, Herman's Hermits, you name it. And so it was just always kind of a rock and roll and guitar centric record collection being formed and collected by my older brothers. And they also had acoustic guitars around the house. So there was all that music. My older brothers, who really very much became my male role models, were hugely influential because music was a huge part of their lives. And so from the cradle for me, that it was the same. So I've always had that affection and inspiration just from the look of the guitar and obviously the sound of the guitar.
And I know we'll come back to this later on in the show, but I understand the Beatles had a massive impact on your early life. And
Well,
I think there's an
yeah.
Ozzy Osbourne quote where he said something about, when he heard the Beatles, it was like all of a sudden he was seeing the world in color. How would
Interesting,
you
yeah.
describe your experience of discovering the Beatles?
Well, it's hard to really, verbalize the meaning because, I was literally in the cradle. So, it's never not been in my life, I think is the best way for me to explain it. Because it was happening in real time from my birth, if that makes sense. They hit America in February of 1964. So I'm barely, I'm not even a year old, but again, that music is already starting to get into my DNA from my surroundings. And it was always the family's favorite group. And then all my friends growing up, once I started to have my own friend group going to school, the first friend I remember making in first grade was my Beatle buddy to this day, David Martin. And we go to each other's households on the Saturday and trade the Beatle records that we had been given from our elder siblings. They were handing us down all their 45s that they were tired of. And we're like, yes, this is gold. So I don't remember life without it. And so that's kind of my perspective. It's such a deeply ingrained thing, but it's also, consistently stayed with me. Of course, I've, as you can witness from my career, I've gone down so many different paths musically, from classical to jazz to pop and heavy, rock, whatever it might be, fusion. I always come back to that music because it's I almost call it like a security blanket, because it's such a part of my being that I can listen to it and it just makes me feel great. And my analytical musician ears can maybe settle down for a little bit and just let it wash over me, though I still get in there and deeply analyze every bit about every Beatle record ever. Yeah, so there was no like, oh gosh, there's the Beatles, that's really cool. It was just, it always was, if that can, if that makes any sense.
At what point did you pick up your first guitar, and what exactly brought that moment about?
Well, I again with the brothers around having acoustic instruments, I think my mother recognized my passion, desire for it, and started buying me these little plastic toy guitars. Maybe when I was 4, maybe when I was 5. There's actually a picture of me on the internet of me on stage with a country band when I was about 5, playing that toy plastic guitar. And I remember my brother showed me. Now this is because this is pre Smoke on the Water, but I could play I'm Not Your Stepping Stone by the Monkees on one string, you know. And
Yeah.
so
Yep.
so that started my path, and I continually kept learning little bits. And when the brothers weren't around as I got older, I'd sneak in the room and try to teach myself the chords that I saw them playing. And or there was even a public television woman on in the afternoons teaching guitar for beginners, little D major chords and G major chords. So wherever I could get little bits of information, and then I just started learning on my own. And then, you know, it was 70s rock by the time I was in, 12, 13, and Kiss had come along. You know, there was a band that played simply enough and well enough that, somebody with a, developing ear didn't need a teacher. Once somebody showed me a couple of bar chords in the minor pentatonic scale, I was off and running. And I haven't looked back since, really.
Well, I was born in 67, and for 2
All
years,
right.
I think when I was 10 and 11, I was Ace Frehley for Halloween.
You
You
know,
know,
oddly
the
enough, well,
spaceman
yeah.
with aluminum foil.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Oddly enough, I never dressed up. There was a group of older guys in the neighborhood that actually did dress up, and they made costumes. They even went down to the local radio station one day and one evening and passed themselves off as Kiss. And girls were driving by and they were getting kisses, and it was crazy. But
Well,
I just wanted to play. I just wanted to be part of that music. And
well,
that was the first concert I ever saw. I was 13 and I saw the Destroyer tour on it was Kiss and Bob Seger, 1976. But that 13-year-old kid in the very last seat of the very back row of Robert Stadium in Evansville, Indiana, seeing this first rock and roll show and knowing this is what I'm going to do. That moment that really did happen. That feeling came over me because I was already playing and I was in my first band. So this is it, man. I have to do this to be on a stage opening for those guys, whatever it was, 14 years later, is kind of completely inconceivable. I still kind of marvel at that, and never take for granted all the different things I've gotten to do in my career and the amazing people I've played with or gotten to share the stage with. It's been incredible. So
I know Peter Frampton and his music had also been
yeah.
a part of your life and story. Do you remember the first time you heard Frampton come through your speakers? And was it Frampton Comes Alive?
Well, no. So my oldest brother that I mentioned buying all the early 60s stuff, Mark, John was nearest in age, and he's another 4 years younger than he. So 8 years my elder. So he started getting in. He was maybe the Monkees guy, Paul Revere and the Raiders, Love and Spoonful. But then he got into Peter Frampton as early as what is it? Humble Pie, and then all the Frampton's Camel. And there's a record called Frampton that came out right before Frampton Comes Alive. So I was very aware, especially of that record, because I remember listening to it quite a bit. And my brother John had the ubiquitous 68, Volkswagen Beetle that so many of the late 60s, early 70s teenagers had because they were cheap and. But yeah, we would drive around, and some of my favorite moments were listening to music with John and his VW Beetle, and that 8-track is a very fond memory. So then when Frampton Comes Alive came out, I knew Show Me the Way. I knew some of these songs, but then of course they, in front of a live audience and just an even brighter spirit about it. And it was clear, and so that music is deeply ingrained in me as well. And so over the years, it became very apparent that, several things. Not only was Peter a highly underrated guitar player, but that his way of writing, his way of conceiving melody is uniquely his instincts when he's either writing or whether he's improvising. It's a very there's nobody that really does things the way he does. It's really really unique, and it's really great that he's still out there doing it after all these years. Obviously, he's got some physical challenges at this point in his life, but he's still out doing it when he can on a very, very, very high level. So,
And you've also spoken about your love and the influence of Montrose on your younger
oh
self. Do
my
you remember the
gosh,
first
yeah,
time you heard Montrose and what stood
yeah,
out to you about their sound that made you
that
fall in love?
Yeah, that it was just the guitar sound and Sammy Hagar's vocals. That's I think it's 1973. I think that record that we're referencing came out with Bad Motor Scooter, Rock the Nation, every song on there. Space Station Number 5. Um, it just the sound of the guitar, the whole band sounds great. It's just a great, great, great rock record. And as it turns out, I learned years later that it was Don Landy and Ted Templeman, which was pretty much the team that made the first Van Halen records. Same team already in place for 1973, and it's there, man. And Ronnie's playing is so great. The tone is so beautiful, and it's just so articulate, and just very visceral. So that, I mean, for years, especially when I was doing my first club gigs and whatnot, growing up, that was always my, you know, when I'm getting ready to leave the house to go do the show, I was always cranking the first Montrose record. That nothing would get my blood going like that record. And I still love it. It's still top 5 heavy rock records for me, for sure.
Well, all of this is obviously building up to the trajectory you would take. But what was the moment which made you finally say, okay, I'm going to give this music thing a real go? Is there a moment that sticks out to you?
Well, I think there was a moment where, even though, so like I say, I was in a band in Evansville, Indiana, where I grew up. I joined a drummer named Glenn Gore, and we formed a band when I was 13. Our first gig was my 8th grade graduation dance. And I was just completely terrified because I'm, playing in front of all the kids I grew up with for 8 years, and kind of a shy kid, really, and a stage fright. And long story short, but as we went along, so I ended up being with that drummer for the next 7 years until I ended up leaving from Miami to go to school. But within that time, I was getting a lot of live gig experience. I was learning a lot on my own. I was playing in a working band, playing bars when I was 15. But it was pretty much at that time where I really kind of, as you're in the middle of high school and people are starting to talk about, hey, what are you going to do? There was no question that all I had any passion or ability to do was to make music and play guitar. And but for whatever reason, I guess because I kind of, growing up in a smaller town, and there wasn't much of an attitude of like, yeah, go make it, kid. It was more like practicality and, having something that you can do, not to fall back on, but maybe something more reasonable in as far as a dream goes. And I was reading all the guitar magazines, and, Steve Lukather and Larry Carlton and Tommy Tedesco, were legendary session guys and guys that I really loved and looked up to. Well, I better learn how to read music. So I guess the real moment was when I made that decision. I better start taking lessons to be able to read, to be able to play a lot of different styles so that I could, if this band that I'm in doesn't make it, which it turned into a really great band named Taylor Bay, the Taylor Bay Band. We made a record and did some further recordings, and nearly, we had the interest of record labels. We were doing really well. It was a good band. But I guess, I kind of still felt it was like winning the lottery to make it and to break into the record industry and get on a label. But okay, well, I could make a living playing in the studios because these guys, that's what they can do. So very fortunately, I found a local teacher named Ron Pritchett, and he started teaching me how to read. But at that time, I'm a very, proficient player in the rock world. But he started teaching me about jazz and expanding, my listening a bit. And that's really where I can say was a moment where my world, maybe that's when it turned to, color from black and white, where I started to really broaden my horizons, not just from my favorite rock players, which had gone from Ace and Nugent and Rush and your Foghat REO to the great 70s arena rock. But now was blossoming more into when I heard Steve Lukather, I said, there's something different going on here. And then which led me to Carlton and Robin Ford and some other guys with, some more advanced harmonic and voice leading capabilities, which a lot of that comes from being able to navigate chord changes in the jazz world. So that's really what was a turn the corner moment of like, okay. And literally ever since then, I'm not exaggerating. There's really been no plan. It's just, I just kept doing it. I kept going for it, and luckily I had my mother, saw that passion and didn't discourage, but she encouraged. So not every young musician growing up, has a parent that says, yeah, this is okay, whatever you want to do. And she was, though. That's what she raised 4 boys largely on her own. And so she just saw that I had the passion and I was working so hard. And when it came time to go to a college in my local university, the University of Evansville. She supported getting, figuring out student loans and all that and getting me in there. And then I wanted to transfer to Miami, which was a jazz guitar, program. And I knew that Steve Morse and the Dregs had formed there and Pat Metheny had been there. And so I wanted to go there. And somehow we managed, because it's a pretty well-to-do school, and we were very modest of means family, but somehow got the loans and all that to go. And that was a huge step, because I was doing well in the small town, big fish, big fish in a smaller pond. But then I get down to Miami and some of the greatest players from all over the country. And man, that's when you step up even more, when you're surrounded by like-minded, really driven people with the same passion, the same goals of just improving and getting out there and being the best musician you could. So I grew more in the 2 years in Miami probably than any other period in my career, just from that exposure to greatness, and what a beautiful opportunity. And I eternally thank my mother for helping me get down there to do that. So,
well, and clearly those years and years of unsung work and effort went into building your skill and belief in yourself before you made it big. What kept you going on the nights where maybe things weren't as rosy in the mirror as you would have wanted?
in the moment, I can't really recall. Yeah, there's always times where you go, I can't believe we're having to do this. But that happens on every level. Trust me. There's been moments on, the bigger tours that I've been on. It's like, I can't believe this is exactly what I was dealing with when I was playing the smallest of clubs, But that's just life, and that's just part of how things go. You can't all be great. But I think it was just that kind of that blind faith of just knowing that somehow things would work out, and it always has, even in the bad times. You know what I'm saying? There's been plenty of peaks, no doubt, but just as many valleys. There's no doubt. There's been so many ups and downs, but it tends to balance out somehow. And I still have those valleys. Whatever it might be, either just personally or career wise, but the passion never goes away. The love is always there. And so I just persevere and keep going. And that really has been the key for me, alongside quite a bit of hard work, no doubt about it. And just persistence.
Well, and you rattled off a list of incredible guitar names.
Oh,
I find that most of the best guitarists wind up having a lot of different and varied musical tastes, as you have.
Yeah.
How much do you think that variety played into the success you'd later find in, say, Danger Danger and elsewhere?
Well, so that's interesting, because what it really provided me was just the ability to be diverse. And then in doing so, giving me the ability to say yes to a lot of different kind of gigs. It's hard to imagine the same guitarist, being Olivia Newton-John's MD and guitar player for 15 years, also being in Simon Phillips's group, playing very adult fusion, as he likes to call it, adult chord fusion. But I loved each of those equally. And in Danger Danger, somewhere obviously in the middle, I don't know what you would even call it. But at the time that I got the call to do the Danger Danger gig, I also had an opportunity to join Tower of Power, which is a pretty different road I could have gone down. But the short story is that Steve Grove was playing tenor, and I'd gone to University of Miami with him, and they were coming through Dallas, and their guitar player was about to leave to go do a pop tour with Laura Branigan. They needed a guitar player. They asked me to come sit in Dallas. I did. I went to the used record store, bought a couple records to learn the songs they wanted me to do, and went and jammed and had a great night. And they were like, yeah, we want you to come out. But I'd just gotten the Danger Danger offer. So I'm like trying to figure out what to do. So at any point in my life and career, I could have gone down so many different paths, and then there you're left to make a decision. And of course, everything changes in that moment, right? Because musically, obviously, Danger Danger was just pretty straight ahead rock and roll stuff. But there was so much about it that was so defining for me, not really as a career, though that's a lot of people know me from that, and I love that, but more as a human being and a person, and what it was that my real goals were. Where at that point I thought, oh, being in a band on a major label, being on MTV, that kind of seemed like the grail. Like, I think, isn't that what we want? I think any musician at that time would have gone, oh, of course, that's what we want. Yeah. It's like, And I turned into Scooby-Doo. Yeah, yeah.
How did the
But it was
Danger gig come about?
well, I was in Texas after I had gone to Miami. I moved to Denton, Texas, with a couple of great musicians, Steve Bailey, a bassist, who's now the head of the bass department at Berkeley, and Ray Brinker, a drummer. We formed in Miami, but moved to Denton, where North Texas State University is, which is another great jazz school. They had gone there, recruited me in Miami. We moved to Texas. We recorded a record, and it didn't go further than that, but it was a great band. But then I ended up splitting off to do my own thing. I formed the Andy Timmons band. We had just started recording instrumental. Like, of course, I'd done all these different things, but as soon as Surfing with the Alien by Joe Satriani came out, I just remember being the happiest guy. Like, I'm just walking around Denton with this cassette Walkman and just listening to Joe's amazing playing, but as importantly, if not more importantly, the killer songs. I'm just like, man, this is such the path I want to be on. And so met Mike Dane on bass, Mitch Marine on drums through a local buddy of ours, Rob Wexler, who was holding jam sessions at his house. Put us together. Oh, and Rob is also a great engineer. Hey, I've got studio time at midnight on X day. Got any songs? I'll write one. And so that ended up being the first instrumental track I ever did, called It's Getting Better, which ended up several years later on my Ear Ecstasy record. But so we quickly, started playing around town doing old Hendrix and Cream and Bubble Puppy. And that's kind of an odd one to say, but we did Hot Smoke and Sassafras by Bubble Puppy, but also a bit of Vi and Satch and Eric Johnson, whatever I could convincingly, play. And then the band was a lot of fun. So pretty quickly we got a name in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then a guy named Buddy Blaze found out about me. He was artist relations for Kramer Guitars. And he asked a journalist friend of his, David Huff with Jam Magazine, hey, this band, it was actually but became Bad English. It was Neil Sean, but he had done the demos and opted not to do the band at the time, but it was John Waite and Jonathan Cain and Ricky Phillips. But they needed a full-time guitar player to do the record and to tour. And that's through Buddy Blaze at Kramer. That's how they contacted me. I auditioned. I got the gig. I actually got the gig. A week later, Neil had called saying, well, he was reconsidering being in the band. So at that point, there was not much question. Half a Journey or this, this unknown kid from Texas. But right after that, Buddy Blaze, the same guy that made that introduction, said, oh, I know these other guys, Danger, They're signed to Epic. They need a guitar player. So, he was hugely influential in getting my name out there and starting to connect me with some people in that level of the rock industry. So then I auditioned for that group, and then that's how that all happened. And sadly, we lost Buddy a couple of years ago, so he's no longer with us. But I got to spend a lot of time in the later years, and he knows how much I loved him and how much I was thankful for that. And he was very much kind of a mentor for a while, because I didn't really have a manager, but he would have advice and he'd have suggestions about whatever in the business and whatnot. But as I saw the industry for what it was, especially at that time, and said, oh, this really isn't what I thought it would be. It was great fun, and there's zero regrets. I love the guys in the band. I love the touring we did, the bands we met. But I really just knew I wanted to make, the music that was way more personal for me and for others. And it didn't matter whether it was, selling millions of records, as long as I was doing what I really loved and what I wanted to do. And that's kind of what I've done ever since. Very, very fortunately, somehow. I don't know how I get away with it, but I'm still here, somehow.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. And a special thanks to Andy Timmons for joining us. Andy's going to be back again next week to finish up our interview, so please tune back in. Stay safe, everyone.